All right, hey, welcome. We're going to hit chapter 8 here. I hope everybody's having a great day. I'm having a wonderful day here in Great Bend, Kansas. We're going to talk about the growing pains of the country from 1790 to 1820. We're going to hit a bunch of ideas and roll through those rather quickly. Okay, so last unit we talked about, or last chapter we talked about the Constitution and the abandonment of the Articles of Confederation, and everybody gets together and we make this new whatever form of government, and we send it out to the states to be ratified. And there's some fighting between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists on what we're going to do. But ultimately, in June of 1788, New Hampshire becomes the ninth state to ratify the Constitution, which makes it the actual governing law of the land. There's still some work that needs to be done um, for New York to come on, and really once New York's on, then the nation's unified. Right at that point, right? We hold elections in 1788. We create a new government in 1789, and George Washington becomes our first president. He is the only president to be elected unanimously by the Electoral College. All right. At first, the Federalists are not going to comprise a political party. They're just basically a group of dudes that see the function of government the same way, right? They hold certain assumptions about how a country should be run, and one of those is that hey, if you're going to take part in politics, you have to have a stake in this government or this country, and we're going to tie that to land ownership. But they don't believe that the revolution really changed anything about the relationship between the classes, the rich and the poor, the genders, or even or the races, right? You still have you still have enslaves, the enslaved Africans, the enslaved blacks. You have freed blacks that are really not seen as citizens or not seen as of really any importance to the founding fathers at this point, right? Washington is going to fill his cabinet with people that are going to share some of those assumptions, right? We're going to have Federalists like Edmund Randolph, Edmund Knox are going to be Secretary of War, Secretary of Attorney General. Alexander Hamilton is going to be the first Secretary of Treasury, right? Like the reason he's on the $10 bill is the fact that he was the first Secretary of Treasury. And then we're going to have some interesting picks like Thomas Jefferson, who's not a Federalist. He's a staunch anti-Federalist, right? And he's going to be given one of the largest, most important positions in the government as the Secretary of State. Now, some people would look at that as like, hey, we're just going to take Jefferson, kick him out, get him out of the country as much as we can. And I could see some of that. But like some of it is that Jefferson is so talented and so smart that Washington doesn't want to waste his talents. All right. Much of the opposition came about because of the lack of the Bill of Rights, and we talked about that before. And so we had to promise to get one. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. It starts out as 13 amendments that are sent out to the to the states, and I believe 11 of those 13 are ratified. 10 of the original 13 are ratified, and then the 27th Amendment was actually one of the original amendments. So we go there. The first is that your five freedoms: speech, press, assembly, religion, petition. Second one is the right to bear arms in a well-regulated militia. The third is the not to house soldiers. The fourth one is freedoms from unreasonable searches and seizures. The fifth is due process, the right to avoid self-incrimination. Sixth Amendment is trial by an impartial jury. The seventh is right to a jury in a civil case. No excess bails or cruel and unusual punishments in the eighth. And then the ninth says basically the people retain rights not given to the government, and the states retain rights that are powers that are not specifically given to the federal government, right? So we have that. Look, the nation has new government, but it's not going to change any of our problems. The biggest problem America has early on is the fact that we are heavily, heavily in debt. 1789, America is like $53 million in debt, which sounds like peanuts to what we are today, but that's actually 100% true. But money's a little bit different, is a lot different in the 1700s, right? America's heavily in debt to Europe. We haven't been able to pay our debts since the 1780s, and that's a situation where you stop. Not only do countries stop loaning you money, but they start sending over military forces to get some of their money back. And so Hamilton's like, look, we got to figure this problem out. And so he comes up with a three-prong attack. And he writes out what he's going to refer to as reports on public credit, reports on national banking, and then report on manufacturing. All right. Public credit. Hamilton believes that we need the support of the wealthy. You need rich people to buy into this idea of a new government, right? And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is if we promise, if we pledge to honor our debts at face value. So all this paper money that's floating around, continentals that are out there, Hamilton says, look, we have to honor that money. And people are upset because when poor people or people of lesser means have paper money from the government, oftentimes what they would do is they would sell it to a richer person for hard money like silver or gold in a uneven transaction. So I have a $10 bill, and you give me $1 worth of silver, right? So you're buying $10 for $1, basically, right? In that situation. And Hamilton says, look, what we have to do is we have to basically give those people $10 worth of value on that paper money. And so the way that we're going to do that is in 1789, we're going to buy up all of those outstanding all of that outstanding paper money that's floating around. And we're going to pay for it with government bonds. And so you're going to bring me all that old money. I'm going to give you a government bond that's going to mature in 3 years in 1792. And I will pay you face value plus interest, right? Some people are in favor of this, like South Carolina, that has a huge amount of debt still left over. Other states like Virginia or North Carolina have paid off most of their debt from the Revolution, and they're like, why do I have to pay the debts of the other countries? But anyways, Hamilton says, look, we're all in this together. We need to get it taken care of. And he believes it's going to strengthen the economic outlook of the country, right? And so we do this to smooth this over, this assumption of public debt. Um, Hamilton and Madison and Jefferson meet together. And if you've seen the musical, this is the room where it happened, the room where it happened. So in exchange for the support of people like Madison and Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists, so to speak, um, we're willing. Hamilton's willing to trade this. We're going to move the nation's capital from New York City, excuse me, New York City, to a southern location. And so we're going to have a federal city in Washington, D.C. on the banks of the Potomac. And I know today, I don't really, myself, I don't necessarily think of Washington, D.C. as being in the South, but ultimately it is. It's sandwiched between Maryland, which is a slaveholding state, and Virginia, which is a slaveholding state, and that's the power base of the South in 1790. Okay, Hamilton's plan works very well. It restores confidence in Europe and the rest of and in the wealthy of the United States, and everybody kind of buys in. Everyone's like, "Yay!" Right? Secondly, Hamilton wants to establish a national bank. Well, where in the Constitution does it say that we can have a national bank? It doesn't specifically say that we can have a national bank. However, it does say that we can have the Congress has the power to coin money or to borrow money or to issue money. And then it also says in one of the clauses that Congress should have the power that's necessary and proper to carry out the express powers that are given to it. So Hamilton reasons that, hey, if you could regulate money and control money and do all of those things, then you should have the power to establish a bank, right? And so Hamilton says, look, the bank's going to loan money, it's going to issue money. It's also going to be a holding spot for the tariffs and the not taxes, but the sale of lands that we bring in. And people can buy stock in the bank, right? They can buy stock in the United States. And Jefferson argues that there's no power given in the Constitution. We talked about the implied powers. Washington ultimately sides with Hamilton, as he does with most financial issues. Washington's a supporter of Jefferson, but when it comes to financial issues, he is a big backer of Hamilton. And so Washington agrees, and they create this national bank in 1791. All right, wanting to raise revenues to help pay for to pay for these bonds that they've issued to the very wealthy and to Europe, Hamilton wants to increase manufacturing, right? Or at least increase revenue on manufacturing. So he proposes what we're going to call an excise tax, which is a tax that's made on a finished good, right? He's going to put tariffs on foreign made goods to encourage Americans to make more stuff. And he's going to put a tax on whiskey, right? And when Hamilton envisions this tax, he's thinking of the big brewers or the big distillers in places like Boston and New York and whatnot. People that are making their money by distilling whiskey and selling it to people, right? And so Washington approves all these things. Um, Remember this tax on whiskey because it's going to come back to bite us in the butt in about 10 slides or so, right? All right, so we have all of those things that go into effect. Relatively, all of them are successful except for the tax on whiskey, and America kind of plods its way through this first administration, right? Um, all right, so Madison and Thomas Jefferson believed that the government had overstepped its powers in the creation of the bank and the use of tariffs and all of those things. And they believe that ultimately those would all be to the advantage of the wealthy or the city dwellers and not to the idea of these yeoman farmers. And so Jefferson starts to publish a newspaper called the National Gazette. And this is an anti-federalist newspaper in which Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, begins to write articles that badmouth not only Alexander Hamilton, but also George Washington and the decisions that the current administration makes that he is third in command of, right? And this paper is popular enough in the South and in the rural areas of our country that it helps to form a Democratic Republican Party, right? This is our first political party. And so Democratic Republicans are going to be basically anti-federalist plus, right? They're going to favor a very limited government. They want to take away powers from the federal government. They want to decentralize power, which is a fancy way of saying, hey, they don't want all the power to rest in Washington, D.C. They want power to rest at the state level or even the city level, right? Jefferson envisions the nation as spreading out and all these small farmers owning, 100 acres, 50 acres, whatever that land mass is, and local city governments controlling most of the power, right? This idea of states' rights, the power would flow up from the yeoman farmers to the city level, to the county level, to the state level, and then to the national level, right? And he wants to promote the public good against the private interest of the Federalists, right? So we're framing this as the public good being, the small farmers, the common people. Okay, so that's our first political party that's going to come about. You're going to have the Democratic Republicans, and then you're going to have the Federalists. In 1790, we have to figure out who's going to be a citizen and who can be a citizen and who can't be a citizen, right? We just have this new country. We're going to have new rules. And so basically, a citizen had to be free white of good character. Someone had to vouch for the fact that you're not a scoundrel. What that excludes is slaves and freed blacks and Native Americans and Asians and anybody that doesn't have pale skin. Full citizenship with voting rights would have additional restrictions that we've already talked about. Most states are going to require some sort of a property ownership or at least some sort of paying of taxes. New Jersey interestingly allows unmarried women that own property to vote all the way up until 1807. So, women are able to vote in state elections in New Jersey until 1807. How would an unmarried woman become a property owner? Well, you could be widowed and your husband leaves you land, or you could be orphaned and your father leaves you land, right? Those are two ways. So we have that. The French Revolution. All right. A lot of our early problems in our country are going to deal with money in France. And the French Revolution combines those two ideas. The French Revolution causes lots of problems for America. If you remember all the way back probably to your sophomore year of history, or if you took world history or Western civilization um, in college. We talk about the French Revolution, right? We have a king. We have King Louis the 15th, right? 16th. Oh, yeah, King Louis. It's 14th, 15th. It's doesn't matter. It's the 15th, I think. Um, and shoot, I should anyway. It doesn't matter. Louis is having problems and with money and all kinds of things in France, and the people rise up and they kick him out of power, and the French take over, right? But the French government, so you have a change of power in the French government. Well, the French government had been the main supporters of the American Revolution, right? They've been, they loaned America a ton of money, and they expect to get paid back. Well, America changes governments and the French change governments, right? And we have some issues. Many Americans support the revolution to begin with because it's very similar to what we did. We didn't like the king of England, and we make our own government. So we're like, hey, France, you're getting rid of your king, yay! Right? The problem comes when the revolution kind of spins out of control a couple of years in, and we have the reign of terror when the Jacobins take over and they start executing anybody that's a enemy of the revolution, right? And then Napoleon takes over and it kind of unifies France together. And when Napoleon takes over, even before that, during the Reign of Terror, they start to ask for their money back. They're like, "Hey, we loaned you a bunch of money. We don't have any money now. Would you give us some money?" And Washington's like, "Look, I'm going to remain neutral during your revolution. I don't want to get involved in it. And I don't know if I give you the money back if you're going to win the revolution, right? Like there's England and Prussia and other nations are trying to reinstall monarchies in France. And so if you give this money, start making loan payments back to the new French Republic, well, then are those loan payments going to be honored by the restored monarchy? Right? And so there's some questions on what to do. And then in 1793, we have France sends over a guy by the name of Edmund Charles Ghent to the United States to work on an alliance between the United States and France. However, ultimately, what Ghent is there for is he's there to hire American sailors and American ships to attack British ships in the Caribbean. England makes a lot of money in the Caribbean with rum and sugar and those types of things are growing in the Caribbean. And if the Americans could act as privateers, which would be basically a state-sponsored pirate to attack the British and cause them to lose money or commerce, then that would be a huge win for France. And so he pays off a bunch of people. The British find out about it. They begin to capture all American. They begin to capture American privateers, and then they begin to attack American ships, believing that America is sponsoring France, right? Ultimately, Britain wants to avoid war with the United States, and so they offer to pay for the cargo that they've taken off of American ships. America sends John Jay to England. John Jay is he's one of our framers. He's one of the people that actually negotiate the Treaty of Paris to win us our independence. He's also the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And John Jay goes over to England and he works out a deal. And he's like, look, number one, Britain's going to pay for all the things they've taken. Number two, they're going to leave the forts of the American Midwest. America is going to be allowed to trade freely on the open seas. And we're going to continue to work on paying our debts that we owe to citizens, right? However, the Jay Treaty didn't address the practice of impressment by the British. And so impressment is this practice that the British would do where they would go into a port city, probably a foreign port, like let's say in the Caribbean or in Europe someplace, and they would find a sailor that typically speaks English. And so the British would be like, oh, you must be a British sailor that's AWOL or a deserter. And so they would force that sailor to serve on a British ship, right? And so they're forcing U.S. sailors to serve on British Navy ships against their will, and that's impressment, right? And that's going to be a problem moving forward, right? Um, so we have that to make sure the Americans and the British don't get too close. Spain offers a deal to allow Americans to ship goods through New Orleans because they're afraid of an American-British alliance that would threaten Spanish holdings in the New World. All right. The Jay Treaty showed the Federalists favored Britain over France, and the Democratic Republicans felt betrayed because the French are about the common people rising up, and they're like, oh, you see, the Federalists only want to support the rich, right? And so the Democratic Republicans start to try to paint the Federalists as people that love the monarchy, right? Let's keep going here just for a second. Let's not. All right. And so we have that. All right. I told you to remember about whiskey, and let's do that. So, upon the recommendation of Alexander Hamilton, the United States places a tax on all whiskey produced or sold in the country, and that's great if you're taxing the large distributors in New York City or in Boston or in Philadelphia or whatever. They charge them basically 0.075 cents per gallon. So basically, you would have to produce what, like 7 cents a gallon. You'd have to produce 100 gallons to pay $7 in taxes, right? So it's a pretty low threshold. Typically, people would just add that price. It's an excise tax. People would add that price onto the good they sold. And in large cities, it works well enough. However, in the West, like Western Pennsylvania, there's a problem. There's no currency in Western Pennsylvania, right? The new dollars that we're printing aren't really getting out to the West. And if they are, they're not getting out there in enough. There's not enough banks, and there's not enough commerce, and there's not enough things to have money flowing through the region. And so the barter system is really in place out there, right? So you're trading eggs for butter or whatever. However, in Western Pennsylvania, whiskey would be used as a form of currency. All right, like I have a wagon full of corn, I can trade you some corn, or I can distill that and I can put it in bottles like this, which is water. It's not whiskey. Unfortunately, right? It's not. This might be a little bit more entertaining if it was. Anyways, in Western Pennsylvania, whiskey is used as a form of currency, and you would trade it. So, hey, I'll give you a pint of whiskey for, I don't know, a pound of butter or whatever that needs to be. And so whiskey become kind of a de facto currency. And so the people of Western Pennsylvania are really upset about this whiskey tax, right? And so 4 counties in Pennsylvania begin to rebel against the nation in 1794. They tar and feather officials, tax officials. They break up the U.S. mail. They burn some houses. They burn a post office. They're trying to spread their ideas into Kentucky and South Carolina. They even reach out to England and France in hopes that they're going to support this rebellion against England. They're going to try to form their own little country. And it sounds crazy, but ultimately they're making the same arguments that were made during the Revolution. We have a foreign government or a large government that's a long way away. It's not foreign; it's just a long way away. And so Washington D.C. Or New York or wherever the government is too far away to meet the needs of Western Pennsylvania. And we can see that in the fact that they're taxing us on our own money when they won't provide us money to spend. And so if the government no longer protects your life, liberty, or property, right, those 3 things that they don't protect your life, liberty, or property, then it's the right of the people or the responsibility of the people to rebel or to change the government in some way, according to John Locke. And so the rebellion doesn't stop. And so Washington is basically called upon. He's like, look, we have a rebellion. What are we going to do? We have to put this down to show that this new government means business. If you remember Shays' Rebellion, the governor of Massachusetts tries to call up a national response, and he doesn't have the ability to do that because the other states won't send anybody. Well, Washington, under the Constitution and the new stronger government, the federal government of America, is able to form a 1,300 or 13,000 man militia and march them out to Western Pennsylvania. And you're like, Lindstrom, I've never heard of a battle in Western Pennsylvania in the 1700s over whiskey. And you're right, because one never happens. By the time Washington assembles a militia and marches them from New York to Western Pennsylvania, the rebellion is over, right? It takes a long time to march that long and that many people and all that stuff. And so the rebellion was stopped, and they're like, "Oh, Washington's coming with an army. We better get in line." And so they do that. And so basically, um, the rebellion fades away, and everybody's like, "Oh, hey, you should have been here yesterday. There's some really bad dudes rebelling against the whiskey tax. I told them to stop. I did, but they wouldn't listen to me. You know how it goes." And so, anyways, the rebellion is stopped, uh, and it's signaled that insurrection or defiance of the federal government would be responded with federal power, right, of the United States. And so the Whiskey Rebellion is successful in putting down this revolt, where Shays Rebellion, the government was not successful in that. And so you see the benefit of having a strong central power in those two instances, right? Washington had hoped to settle veterans of the Revolution in new lands west of the Appalachians, like paying off war debts with to the troops with new land grants. And so, in order to do that, you have to displace the Native Americans that live there. And we're going to fight a series of battles with the Shawnee and the Miami, and different Indian tribes to do that. Um, Anthony Wayne, who wins some notoriety in the Revolution, is going to go out to the West and win a huge battle a huge military victory in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, in which Wayne's going to defeat the Shawnee and the Miami, and they're going to sign the Treaty of Greenville, which is going to open up settlement into the upper Midwest. Ohio, what we're going to call it the Midwest today, Ohio and Michigan and those places, right? And so we have that. And so by the end of Washington's administration, the money issue is pretty well underhand. We're still going to have some issues with France. We're starting to open up avenues, or at least we've taken over land. We've taken the land over from the Native Americans in the Upper Midwest for settlement. And so Washington serves for 8 years, and he's like, "Look, I'm done." In 1796, Washington chooses to step down and not run again, and his vice president John Adams is elected president. And Thomas Jefferson, who is his vice president, is elected was Thomas Jefferson, who was Washington's Secretary of State, is elected vice president, which creates a weird situation in American history in which Adams is a Federalist and Jefferson is a Democratic Republican, right? Like, so we've had the establishment of political parties, or at least the beginning of the establishment of political parties here. And so you have two men with very different ideas about how government should be ran. And Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson and Adams, excuse me, absolutely hate each other during this time. Um, in their old age, they form a friendship, as former presidents typically do. But Adams's last words on his deathbed aren't to his wife, "Oh, I love you," or "I wish I would have spent more time at home with the kids," or anything along those lines. His last words are, "Alas, Jefferson lives." But what Adams doesn't know is that Jefferson had died just hours before. And so both of these men that hated each other so much and then later became friends are ultimately going to die on the same day. Uh, all right. Moving forward, France and Britain still at war during Adams's administration, and France is going to issue a decree that, hey, they're going to seize any ship that's trading with England, and this is problematic for America because America makes a lot of money with trade with England, and so they start to target American ships that are trading in English ports in the Caribbean, right? And France and the United States engage in something that's called the Quasi-War from 1796 to 1800. It's going to last all of Adams' one administration. And France is going to seize about 84 of our ships. And it's going to cause America to bulk up. We're going to build and develop a new navy, and we're going to fight the French on the open seas, right? In an undeclared war. And so France eventually is going to send diplomats to Washington, D.C., in efforts to try to create peace, right? And so we're going to send 3 diplomats over, and those diplomats are going to demand the United States pay back the revolutionary debt that America borrowed from France, even and provide them personally a large bribe before they would even talk to the United States about peace with this troubles in the sea. And they write Adams a note, and the problem is Adams says, "Hey, pound salt, man, get out of here. And he takes that note and he publishes it in the newspaper. Now, Adams is a classy dude. He retracts their name and he puts Diplomat X, Diplomat Y, Diplomat Z, and that's why it's referred to as the XYZ affair. But anybody that was following the papers or politics during that time knew who those people were, right? Next problem that's going to happen for France and America during this time frame is that the French colony of Haiti is going to revolt. And it's going to be victorious. It's going to win its independence. And so the United States has built a strong navy at this point, and France doesn't have a port in Haiti, which was the largest of its colonies in the Caribbean. And America instantaneously recognizes the new Haitian government under the leadership of Lasso Toulant and um, I butchered that name. Anyways, the United States issues of recognition to Haiti and to Toussaint, Louverture Toussaint, and it hurts French power in the Caribbean, which is great for America, but it also really upsets American slave owners because we're recognizing a slave rebellion that overthrew a sovereign government. And Adams doesn't have a problem with that because Adams is one of the few, actually only one of the first seven presidents. Adams and his son John Quincy Adams are the only two that don't own slaves, right? And so we have that. Um, And so problems with France don't get resolved during the Adams administration. And so Adams is going to pass two bills. He's going to pass the Alien Act and the Sedition Act. And they're two separate acts. A lot of times they're combined together. Interestingly enough, the Alien Act popped up is going to pop. It has recently popped up in the news with the deportations of immigrants in the United States. But we have the Alien Act in which the president could deport new immigrants who threaten American security. And so, no, it's not looking at third world immigrants at this point coming over to the United States. It's looking at French operatives. They're coming over to sow disdain or dissent in the American colonies. And so Adams is going to use that power to send people back to France. And then we also passed something called the Sedition Act that has jail time or fines for speaking or writing against the government in a malicious manner, right? And so Jefferson and Madison mobilize against the Alien and Sedition Acts. They believe that it's against the Constitution. However, there's no judicial review that's written into the Constitution. That's not going to come about until 1805 with Marbury versus Madison. And so Jefferson writes something called the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions, in which he argues that since the government gets its power from the people and the individual states join together to form the government, then individual states should have the power to nullify acts of Congress, like the Sedition Act or the Alien Act, right? And most states reject this idea due to the need of a strong government. But ultimately, what's happening here is this is the beginning of the states' rights arguments. Should states have more power than the federal government, right? During the Articles of Confederation, states had more power. The Constitution is passed, the federal government has more power. And then you have people like Jefferson that believe that states should. And so you have the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that start to sow those seeds, water it a little bit. Eventually, in the 1830s, we're going to have some tariffs and some problems with South Carolina. And we have the nullification crisis, in which John C. Calhoun argues that individual states can not pay attention to specific laws if it affects certain areas of the government or the certain areas of the country disproportionately. Right. And then ultimately this conversation is going to blow up even larger. It's going to come to a head with the Civil War at the end of the class. Right. All right. The 1800s, the quasi-war comes to an end with the Treaty of Mortefontaine. Basically, this splits the Federalist Party because ultimately the federal government's working with France. It reopens trade with France and it ends the practice of the French taking American ships. But none of this is really going to matter because Thomas Jefferson's going to win the presidency of 1800. The Revolution of 1800, sometimes it's called, right? And why is it called the Revolution of 1800? Well, if you look at the first two presidents, it's Washington and Adams. Um, they're different people. Adams comes from Massachusetts. Washington comes from Virginia, but they're both very, very wealthy coming into office. They're large landowners. Um, and it's believe they're both federalists. They believe in the idea of big federal governments and close ties between the federal government and business. Jefferson comes in, and Jefferson is a staunch anti-federalist, right? He believes in this idea of yeoman farmers, and it's seen as the Revolution of 1800 because number one, um, the the idea of government changes from being going in the hands of the wealthy to be going into the hands of the common man to some extent, right? But ultimately, the Revolution of 1800 is the transition of power from a federalist government to a democratic Republican government, right? So you have the Federalists, you have one political party peacefully giving power to another, right? Interestingly enough, the election of 1800 originally ends in a tie. Remember, we have the Electoral College. And during this time frame, you didn't vote for a president and a vice president together. You voted for your top two picks. And because there was miscommunication with the Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson and his vice presidential choice, who was Aaron Burr, um, received the same amount of votes, right? And so that election goes to the House of Representatives. Now, interestingly enough, remember how much Hamilton and Jefferson hated each other. Well, there's somebody that Hamilton hates even more than Jefferson, and that's Aaron Burr, because at least Jefferson you can deal with. Like Jefferson has a set of values that he believes in and he works towards. And Hamilton believes that Burr will just blow with the wind, wherever he's going to get advantage. And in fact, Burr's actions in this election that goes to the House of Representatives goes to show that Burr was supposed to be the vice president. All of a sudden, he sees the opportunity to become president and begins to work for it. Hamilton begins to campaign for Jefferson within Congress, and he wins. Of course, Hamilton and Burr ultimately fight a duel. Not necessarily because of his support of Jefferson, but because of some articles that are written by Hamilton about Burr in newspapers, and Burr kills Alexander Hamilton. Because of this confusion in the election of 1800, that we passed the 12th Amendment, which makes voting for the president and the vice president part of the same ticket. Again, it's called the Revolution of 1800 because political parties switch hands without violence or death, right? Jefferson's visions of America is not business. It's more about small farmers they're going to be self-sufficient. They're going to grow what they need and then trade any excess. So he turns away from the commercial and urban policies of the Federalists and begins to sell federal land to the common people as much as he can. Right. Basically, Jefferson reasons that if a yeoman farmer owns their own land and they can produce everything they need, then they can't be corrupted by the government, by the idea of gifts of property. And Jefferson sees the role of government as limited by the will of the people, right? And so we have that. Jefferson doesn't believe in large standing armies because large standing armies are a tool of the tyrant. That's America's belief all the way back to the times of Charles I. He slashes the size of the army. He gets rid of most of the Navy that Adams built, but he does respond militarily to the Barbary pirates, who were Muslims that were attacking American ships off the coast of Africa. It doesn't really matter that they're Muslims. I don't know why I throw that in there, but that's just Muslim nations were attacking America. America was being attacked by Northwest African nations as they traded with Europe. Right. In 1803, Jefferson has this huge opportunity to provide this dream of small farms from coast to coast. When France had lost its colony to Haiti, eventually, so France and Spain trade land back and forth in the American West quite a bit. And at one point, Spain controls New Orleans. And they sign a treaty with the United States to give farmers access through New Orleans. France takes over and ends that treaty. And America had lost use of that New Orleans, and so Jefferson sends Robert Livingston to France to negotiate um, the use of New Orleans to transport American goods down the Mississippi to the Gulf, right? Napoleon is in charge of France during this time, and he's fighting all of Europe. And the war's not going really all that well. And he needs money. And so he needs enough money that he can get it quick. And they lost Haiti, they lost most of their colonies in the Caribbean. And Napoleon offers to sell all the Louisiana territory to the United States for $15 million, which is about 2 cents an acre, which is such a good deal that Livingston doesn't even write Jefferson and ask for it. He's like, yeah, let's do that. And so basically, the America buys all of this for 2 cents an acre, and in reality, America buys all of this plus the Oregon territory up here um, for $15 million. Jefferson sends Mayweather Lewis and William Clark out to explore the area, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Lewis and Clark take the Missouri River and the Columbia River all the way to the Pacific, claiming it all for the United States. They write everything down in these big journals. They trade with Native Americans, and they lose one guy on their quest, which was called the Corps Discovery, and that gentleman dies from appendicitis. All right. Um, 1803, the court case of Marbury versus Madison is very, very interesting. In 1800, we have the election of 1800, and the Federalists realize that they're going to lose, and so they come up with this idea that they're going to stack the courts. They're going to appoint as many Federalist judges as they can in key positions, right? And so we have a gentleman by the name of Marbury who'd been promised a position of a justice of the peace by President Adams' administration. He's going to be justice of the peace in Washington, D.C. And his basically his paperwork was left on the desk of the Secretary of State, who was Madison at that point, and Madison was supposed to deliver the paperwork out. When Madison came in, he looked at all the paperwork that was on his desk. He took it and he threw it in the trash because he's not going to appoint federal judges to these positions. And so Marbury sues Madison for the right for his judgeship. And it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court hears the case, and he's like, "Look, Marbury's right. He should have been awarded this position. However, the court that was established um, by the Congress, this Judicial Act of 1789, basically was established, which gave the Supreme Court the power to grant Marbury the paperwork, is unconstitutional because Congress can't give powers to a co-equal branch of the government, right? And so if the Supreme Court is supposed to be equal to Congress, then Congress can't increase or decrease the powers of the Supreme Court. And so therefore that law would be against the Constitution, and the Supreme Court would be able to strike that law down. And so we established this idea of judicial review in which the Supreme Court can rule a law or an act of government unconstitutional. All right. Jefferson wins the re-election in 1804. He still has problems with the British. He still has problems with the French. Maybe not as much problems with the French, but he has problems with the British. The British are impressing American sailors. The British are are selling guns to the Native Americans in the American West, and it's causing problems. In 1804, the British take 4 sailors and force them to serve on the British ship, the Leopold. This is the Leopard, but I believe it's the HMS Leopold. Anyways, Jefferson doesn't want to go with war with England, and he settles on this idea of an embargo act. And is a law that prohibits American ships from leaving any port until the British and the French stop taking them. And what this law ultimately does is it shuts down American trade. American farmers couldn't sell their goods overseas. They can't manufacture, manufacturers can't sell their goods overseas. Nothing's coming in, nothing's going out, and the American economy just falls apart. Well, now, if you're Jefferson, that's not necessarily a bad idea because remember, Jefferson's whole idea is to create yeoman farmers that grow everything they need on their farm and to be self sufficient. So it plays into his ultimate idea. The bill is ultimately so unpopular in 1807 that Jefferson changes it to a bill called the Non Intercourse Act of 1808, which doesn't forbid trade with everybody, just prevents trade with France and Britain. And Jefferson leaves office in March of 1909, and James Madison is elected president, right? Jefferson expands the country a huge deal. He kind of restores the idea of going back to yeoman values, and so we have that. And so, anyways, Madison has to deal with this growing Indian threat in the West, Native American threat in the West. We have a Shawnee chief by the name of Tecumseh and his brother that are trying to unify all the Native American tribes together to fight against encroachments of the whites into places like the Upper Midwest or just the West in general, right? And so we have William Henry Harrison, who's the governor of Indiana, and he attacks the village of Tecumseh, which was known as Prophet Town. And when he destroys the village, he finds evidence that the British are selling guns to the Native Americans. And so, in combination with the British selling guns to the Native Americans and weapons of war to the Native Americans, and then impressing our sailors, Madison asked for a declaration of war in June of 1812. And it doesn't really go all that well for America. The British take Detroit. They take control of most of the Northwest. In July of 1814, they conquer Washington, D.C. They burn it to the ground. Um, and America does win some naval battles on the Great Lakes. We hold out in Fort McKinley in Baltimore. That's where Francis Scott Key sees the battle and he writes the Star Spangled Banner. Um, and ultimately, why the war comes to an end of 1812, and this is a not a very good coverage of the War of 1812, but ultimately why the war comes to an end is because the British defeat Napoleon in Europe. And they want peace in Europe, and they don't really want to fight in America. It's too costly. And so we signed the Treaty of Ghent in 1812 or 1814, in which everything just goes back to the way it was. The borders are going to remain the same. We're going to pay back debt from the Revolution, and England will stop the impressment of sailors. Um, Ironically, the most famous battle in the War of 1812 happens in New Orleans, and it's actually takes place after the Treaty of Ghent. I'm not going to be able to show you this music video, but there's a great song by Johnny Horton called "The Battle of New Orleans" that I always play for my in-person classes. And there's a link there on the video, or you can just search that on YouTube. Andrew Jackson is going to lead these forces in New Orleans, and he's going to ride that military victory to political success really for the rest of his life. And so that's going to do it for chapter 8. And I will see you guys with chapter 9 here before too long. So I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you then.